everyone. My name is Rafal, and I would like to welcome everyone to my Headshot Photography podcast. Today, I have very special guest, Jason Baff, amazing photographer. To be honest, whenever I posted who I should interview, your name was just keep popping up. Everyone wants me to talk to you.
Wow.
To be honest with you, like I thought you're never gonna respond to me, but you respond not only quickly, but we set this up really quick. So I'm
Yeah, I
honored.
don't know how to feel about. I mean, I got nothing going on, man. So I'm
Okay,
all,
we can
I
talk.
don't know where
Um,
that comes from, but yeah, I'm here for you.
well, I think you're really humble, but your work speak for itself, and
Yeah,
everyone who is in that
very humble.
industry knows you, and you make huge impact on this industry. So I'm really honored I have a chance to talk to you, dive into your world, talk about technical stuff, your creative process, and everything in between. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation, and
No, it's
yeah, I'm really honored.
my honor. Thank you. Anytime
So
someone wants to listen to me talk about lighting or any of this stuff,
your world's open.
I can talk all day about it. So
Okay.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
dive
Okay.
in.
Okay. Perfect. So let me start with just a general question. How did you get into this whole industry? What's the process? I know from my own experience, people coming from all sorts of different directions. There are people who doing completely different stuff, and all of a sudden they discover, okay, you know what, I want to be photographer. So what was your path into this whole photography world?
It's been kind of back and forth because when I was younger, I always knew I kind of loved playing with my family had a DSL or not a DSLR, but a SLR. And so I used to just play with that all the time. I mean, I was obsessed with it, and I really should have known at that point that that was kind of my calling. But for some reason, I just, I guess that inner voice, I just didn't listen to it, and I went into other things. I mean, I used to sit and watch TV and watch it through I always like letterbox because I'm like old school, and we had like the old TVs and everything. So I always wanted to see the movie like it would appear in a theater. So I would look through it was like a Pentax, and I would
Okay.
zoom in on the TV and I would watch it through the camera. And I just I was always that guy that had a camera in his hand, whether it was a video camera or, film camera or whatever. And I actually went more into filmmaking, and I thought I was going to be a director. I thought I was going to be the next like Steven Spielberg, like a lot of filmmakers. And I went out to LA and worked out there for a while, and San Francisco, and really tried to kind of make inroads there, and studying and taking cinematography classes and editing classes and everything. And I actually still kind of consider myself a failed filmmaker who just found, photography as something that I was good at, but I never really imagined myself being like a photographer. But
Mhm.
the interesting thing is photography has just changed so much, and I spent about 15 years as a graphic designer.
Mhm.
So when there was this kind of integration with Photoshop and photography, which really didn't exist back in the film days as much, um, it really kind of was like the perfect storm for me. And I also, I got diagnosed with, being on the spectrum and ADHD and all these other things that are kind of
Wow.
like the hot words now. And I basically was told, I have a really short attention span. So find things that you can do like start to finish in like one day.
Okay.
And photography just kind of like checks all the boxes for me. And I
Mhm.
love it. And I guess, I mean, I haven't been in this world that long. A lot of people I think assume that I've been quote unquote professional photographer for, my whole life. And, I really came into it really, when I bought my first DSLR when my son was born. And that's kind of where I rediscovered that, and especially I bought a camera, back when like the 5D Mark II, I think was the first
Okay.
one. You could put you could shoot in 24 frames per second and put like a 50 millimeter on it or whatever and have like that film look. So I started really getting into photography again, kind of looking at it as a filmmaker. And
Mhm.
then just, it was funny because like my background, because it was in Photoshop, I was a much better retoucher than I was a photographer for a
Mhm.
really long time. And so I could take really mediocre images. And, I didn't really get lighting. I didn't really know how to light that well. And I could take an image and make it look really good with all the
Mhm.
little things, back, we're talking like 2011, 2012 in there, and I would just like bring up the shadows and everything and make that kind of HDR look that you would get kind of laughed out of the photography industry with now.
Mhm.
But that was like, I was like, oh wow, I have this kind of like special ability to, really retouch and know Photoshop really, really well. And so it kind of came from that. And then over time, I got better with lighting and everything. My background in lighting kind of came from my more of like cinematography. So whenever I'm teaching lighting, I'm always kind of approaching it from working on sets and working on commercials back when I was in LA. And approaching it from that angle versus like flashes and things like that, which were kind of like foreign
Mhm.
to me. But I don't know if that answers the question or.
Yeah, it is. And but it seems like you had also a strong foundation, right? So it's not like you just came completely out of the blue and like, okay, I want to be a photographer. You had some really strong kind of background, which helps you, kind of navigate through this whole thing the way that, you were able to kind of put all those puzzles together and make this work. So that's very interesting. So
Yeah,
tell
I
me
think a
what,
lot of
yeah,
just
sorry.
listening to that inner voice, and just kind of being like, okay, I've always been good at this, and people have always told me, my mom always told me, she was like, you should always, you should be a photographer, since I was a kid. And I was like, come on, I mean, I just like when back in the days of film and I would go into studios and stuff, it just seemed so complicated. And so, like how do I print and how do I work with printers? And, the printing aspect of it was so complicated. And my images just never looked that good. And
Mhm.
so, maybe if I had worked in a studio back then and just kind of, I mean, knowing what I know now, it's really about just being okay with having a lot of failure, starting out and just keep doing it and keep doing it until you get better. But back when I was in my, like 20s or before, I just like, I wasn't, I always said to myself, I wasn't even the best photographer in my like middle school photography class.
Mhm.
There was a kid who wasn't even a photographer, and his pictures were so much better than mine. And so, for some reason, that kind of negative dialogue was in the back of my head. And this kid probably has no idea that I even thought about that. But I was like, I wasn't even the best one in my middle school class, which, we were taking pictures with oatmeal boxes, and
Mhm.
I had no idea what I was doing. But yeah, so just little things like that keep you from following what you're obviously like the back of your mind. You're like, oh, this kind of is fun for me. Like it might be annoying for other people or it might be difficult for other people. And for me, it's just fun. I love
Mhm.
taking pictures of people and especially like portraits and, trying to, and not just taking portraits, but having like a very specific kind of way that you like to take, pictures where in my case, people are usually not happy. They're usually kind of dramatic. There's kind of like this crescendo of emotion.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know why, maybe if I went to a therapist, they could tell me why I like that kind of image. But yeah, I'm rambling again.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. I hear exactly what you're saying because I think we're going for similar journey. I think all of us, because you cannot just learn photography from books and videos, whatever. You have to practice, right? And I
Oh yeah.
also think that with the time, if you put your heart into this, and you just keep failing, keep trying, keep shooting, you eventually get better. But I don't think you can literally just learn some of those stuff because you read some books or um, whatever. Like it takes time to practice. I deeply believe to get better. And that's what they say. 5% talent and 95% of hard work, right? And I
Oh yeah,
think that's
definitely.
what can push you to completely different level. So
I realize so much of what I do, I realize that it's not even about like artistry. It's more about just the craft. And especially for people, again, I keep going to the well of the ADHD thing, but for people
Mhm.
who enjoy the ability to concentrate on something. Like for me, it's very difficult to find something I can concentrate on. But once I find something, I'm there all day. So it
Yeah.
could be a documentary, it could be whatever. And really, Photoshop is one of the only things where when I first started, I was like, oh, wow, this is something I can just sit here and I can focus on. And it's just kind of like hitting the right part of my brain that I can just sit here all day and edit images. And
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. So it's almost sometimes not about even artistry. It's almost just about the craft
Hmm.
of, pushing and pulling and changing tones and stuff like that.
Sure.
Um, and it's really more about the enjoyment of being able to concentrate for something, for longer than 5 seconds.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, because this is something which kind of hit me right now.
Okay.
eh, so do you think that, the retouching process, when you're just sitting on a computer and you just kind of going into this like mindset where, times disappear, literally you're just in completely different zone, also kind of helps you with, the kind of personality, or, you said the HDAD, that it kind of help you navigate through kind of, how you feel, and how you react to this little, all those things. Because I remember, I love retouching as well, and I could spend hours sometimes sitting, and the
Right.
times just were gone. And just makes you excited. You just kind of, well, excited in the way where you can just kind of like focus in your own world. And don't you
Right.
think that that was a little bit for you as well, the kind of the same approach and feeling how you got into this something which really makes you happy, and then just kind of take this anxiety away from you?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there's something very important about what's kind of, I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to like mental stuff, but I would
Mhm.
say I get like a dopamine rush when I'm
Yeah.
doing that. And it's the same thing that I get when I'm working in the studio. And they're really two different, completely different kind of skills.
Yeah.
And in my case, I feel like I've got kind of both of them, but I'm definitely not the best like poser.
Mhm.
So, when I work with models and stuff, it takes me thousands of images to get to the one that I really like.
Mhm.
And sometimes I really am not happy with the lighting that I do. And, but I mean, I know people that can run in and they just have their posing down and they can say, move this and move that and blah, blah, blah. And I just have to keep working and working. And,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and that was one of the things that back in the day, I was like, well, I can't really be a studio photographer because my posing is just, I can't pose like some of these other people that you see, like Sue Bryce comes to mind as somebody who's just
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing at posing, and Lindsay's really good, Lindsay Adler, and the
Mhm.
people that are kind of the top educators. I was like, I can't do that, and so, but yeah, I mean, to get to your question, it's like, yeah, definitely. Um, when it's almost like a meditation. So I sit down and I edit, and sometimes, I mean, I don't even like the images. Sometimes I'll edit so much that I'm just doing it because I'm enjoying the process. And then I go way too far with an image and I have to go back to like a few versions, but go down in my layers and be like, okay, I just kind of added
When
this effect and that effect. And now it's the skin's looking all fake and everything looks ridiculous. So yeah, and that's one of the things that I tell people when they take my workshops is that like some people just aren't going to be that into Photoshop and they're just going to
Yeah.
like want to, skip that part of the process. And that's totally fine too. I have a lot of friends who, they're basically uploading what comes out, maybe a little bit of tweaking in Lightroom or Camera Raw or whatever, but they hate Photoshop or they'd rather give
Yeah.
it to somebody else. And so if that's not your skill set and you really enjoy working in the studio, then, that's great. Just get it right, from
Mhm.
the beginning, get the makeup perfect and make it so that you, and especially with all these new tools, it's really simple. But then you got to realize there's other people who just genuinely enjoy working in Photoshop. And you're never going to be able to, if you hate Photoshop, you're never going to be able to compete with, in the retouching world with people who are just obsessed with it,
Yeah.
And it's the same way that like there's a lot of, pick any profession, people are obsessed with accounting or obsessed with medicine or law or whatever, it's like you're never going to be able to compete with those people because they really enjoy doing it and it matches their skill set. So, but I think it's really important to kind of know certain things for retouching,
Mhm.
But yeah, I would definitely say that like
Yeah.
the
So,
process of, yeah.
so do you think retouching and shooting and lighting has to be somehow combined, because it's like a just like a it's a separate process, but
Mhm.
that's what makes you kind of ahead everybody else, right? And then I 100% agree when you said, like, you cannot compete with people who are extremely, like, into something and passionate about it. Just like, if you really even think about, that's the way I even look at this whole thing. If you put, let's say, 1,000 hours into retouching and someone put, let's say, 100 hours, there's no way you can just even compare yourself to that person, because they are so much ahead of you, that they can even see things differently. They approach things, they more detail oriented. There's so much behind it. But the question what I'm going to ask you the question
Well,
what
let,
I'm
let
going to
me
ask
say something about that, though. There's two sides to it, because there's also kind of this safety net that I have that's
Okay.
not a good thing, which is that a lot of times I'll be shooting and I'll be like, oh, I'll just fix that in
Okay.
post.
Yeah.
The famous, like, polishing it in post or whatever.
Yeah.
And so if I know that I have to get it right that moment, and I'm shooting something like a wedding or whatever,
Mhm.
I don't do that kind of shoot because I'm not good at it.
Mhm.
But if you're always relying on Photoshop to kind of save you, that can also be, you know, a negative when you're shooting. Because I know a lot of the people that I work with, and they're like, yeah, I don't like to bother with too much retouching, and they have gorgeous images, but they just get it right,
Mhm.
straight out of camera.
Yeah. Yeah, 100% agree with you. So let's talk a little bit about your creative process, how those images comes to life. I know this is like a really deep topic, and then we could go probably for hours and hours. But tell me a little bit about, like, so before you shoot, let's say you have a model, then you start shooting. So do you have the image in mind, or it's just basically creative journey which you're going through, and it's just those images, they're just coming along the way. So how you approach to getting from, let's say, point A to point Z, how this whole thing works for you.
Well, there's two different things really. There's the projects that I do that are just for getting in my studio and practicing and trying different techniques and trying to just kind of have fun and enjoying the process. And then there's others that are, clients who are paying me
Yeah.
to take a certain kind of image, which is usually, a portrait or a maternity or, that kind of thing. And I approach one of them, I think photographers really need to get into their studio as much as possible. Or if you don't have a studio, I started out just working, I had just a wall and one alien bee, and whatever you have, just use that. If you just have
Yeah.
a window, use that. Um, but what I do now is basically this. I'll start to, if I'm doing a collaboration with somebody and just wanting to do something for fun, or to get into my studio and practice a little bit. What I'll do is contact, and it's usually not models necessarily, but just somebody who has a look that I find interesting. And some people are kind of surprised that I'm getting in touch with them, just like, oh, I saw this, image from Instagram or whatever. And I still get turned down all the time or get ghosted, and or people are like, who the, hell are you or whatever. The more you have like a portfolio out there, people will kind of be like, oh, okay, this guy seems like legit, but still,
Mhm.
um, it's weird to just like Instagram message random people and be like, "Hey, you want to come over to my studio and start creating some like cool portraits or whatever." So the first thing that if you contact somebody, the first thing they're going to want to know is like, what's the idea, or what do you want to do? And a
Mhm.
lot of times I don't even have an idea. I'll just be like, well, I just want to practice different techniques, and I'll kind of come up with something. But it's good to have some, just even if you just have to make it up in that moment, when they're asking you what you want to do. I'll just get on Pinterest, or go through the different places like, I don't know, F stoppers or Flickr, or, those places, and just look for different ideas, things that kind of stimulate me lighting wise. And I'll try to, whenever I'm doing collaborations, I love to do stuff that I've never done before. So I'm always, if I'm doing the same thing over and over again, it's like, what's the point, of like just lighting a regular portrait with a softbox or a window, umbrella or whatever. So I try to do something a little bit different and get out of my comfort zone. And then, the person will come and they'll have sometimes they'll be amazing at posing and doing things, and other times you'll just meet somebody who kind of doesn't really know what they're doing, and all those things are helpful. But I think it's really important to get into the studio and try different things. And if you fall flat on your face, it's fine. You know, nobody has to see those images. I don't think a lot of photographers are very forthcoming with saying that a lot of their images are terrible, you know. And I don't know. I mean, I know mine are. 90% of my images are garbage, you know. I mean, in my mind at least. And it takes a long time to just find the pose and to find all these things. So I get, you know, I'll come up with these ideas. Just, you know, I'm one of these. I can't really imagine something in my head, so I have to see an image. So I take all these different ideas, and maybe it's an idea for a pose, or idea for lighting, or idea for a set, or whatever. And now I have like my studio space. So I have backdrops. I have, you know, all kinds of just things that I find in, you know, Goodwill, or here they have these little flea markets. And I'm always buying. And, you know, with time, you just kind of like find, you know, things that you think maybe one day you'll use in one of your sessions, you know. And, you know, there's a lot of repetition in my, you know, outfits and stuff. You try to find stuff that's kind of classic or whatever. But I'm always like, my favorite thing to do on like a Sunday or a Saturday is to go to the local flea market here and just see outfits and things. And then you want to find contrast. So you want to find color contrast. I love putting people into warmer colors, because warmer colors kind of come out at you. And then my backgrounds are usually a little cooler. So those backgrounds kind of, it creates that kind of dimension and contrast. And so I've got tons of like mustard and red colored outfits and stuff, but I've also got plenty of blues and stuff. But anyway, you know, then I'll send the person those images, and I think it's really you know, fine to try to kind of copy certain people's looks, because when you start doing it, you're not going to be able to, you know. You can see it all you want to, and you can like try as much as you want to kind of copy it. But it ends up being your own thing, you know. And a lot of stuff is like, I mean, music is a lot of people trying to kind of copy this or that or whatever, having these different influences. And I'm absolutely dependent on just having like things on my phone. And when I kind of run out of ideas for posing, I'll get on my phone and start looking through different poses, or I'll have my assistant help me. And I also love to collaborate. So, you know, if somebody has ideas, if you're working with creative people, a lot of the models I work with have creative ideas. And, you know, sometimes we do makeup, sometimes we don't do anything. Sometimes we'll get their hair wet, or, you know, have the fan blowing on them or whatever. And and a lot of times it's about, okay, this is working or that's not working. Let's try something else, you know, and just kind of trying a bunch of things, and then maybe one idea just, you know, kind of is the best one that you come up with, and you're like, oh wow, you know, and you try to find something that's even better than what you had imagined.
So do you think, like, you know, one idea leads you to another ideas? Because that's what I found sometimes, you know, like you've created something, you know, didn't work, or work a little bit, but now you can improve it. And this is just a constant learning process that, you know, those ideas just like mixing each other, and they creating something new, something, you know, something you never thought before. How's that look for you? That's the way you kind of navigate for this whole process?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge when something's not working. So if I start down a road and we're like, I keep not, you know, like maybe we're working with an outfit, a color scheme, or whatever, and it's not working, it's important to be like, okay, this isn't working, let's move on to something else, you know, because sometimes what you have in your head is not what you're seeing. But I'm really kind of like, you know, it's almost like sonar, you know. We talk about it, we put the idea out there, and then I, you know, start shooting it. And sometimes it's better than you even imagined, and other times it's just like, ugh, like I don't know what I was thinking, you know. Let's move on to something else. And not to be afraid of falling flat on your face. And, you know, I've done shoots where we started out, and, you know, most of the time you'll start out and the shoots are really boring, and the model or whoever you're working with is kind of like not warmed up, and they feel maybe a little uncomfortable. I don't know if you can hear my wiener dog barking at probably
Yeah,
nothing.
well, that's okay.
Anyway, but it's amazing how you can kind of like, if you just kind of keep working with it, you can create something that actually looks beautiful. So when I do my workshops, I usually kind of don't have, I'll start like talking about the idea and we'll start putting it together and then just making tweaks and adjusting and moving the light a little bit and maybe bouncing a little more light over here, maybe adding a backlight or whatever. But it's all about just tweaking in the moment
Mm-hmm.
and then finding the image through, through not being afraid of like, trying to put something away that you like that isn't working and just say, okay, well, let's try this modifier, that modifier. And one of the things that comes from doing a lot of shoots in studios is you start to learn how to correct problems. And a lot of people, I think, get into studios and they get really frustrated because their light doesn't look like they want it to look. And that comes from a lot of failure of being like, okay, why is this not working? Maybe the light isn't high enough, or maybe the flash isn't close enough. Maybe it's too flat because the flash is just a couple of, meters or feet or whatever away too much. So maybe I should move that a little closer. And maybe there's too much bounce, or maybe there's, you know what I mean? And that's where you start kind of learning about light. A lot of light, I think lighting comes from just feel and knowing kind of, I know this modifier, I know that it's going to throw light everywhere. And so I have to get it a little closer to get that like contrast. Or if I'm working with like a parabolic, I know that that's going to like hit them harder. And if I put a grid on it, then it's not going to hit the background as, so just kind of having those recipes, it's almost like a chef who's like, okay, this needs a little more like paprika or whatever, and that's what you get from working in the studio.
Yeah. So you started kind of answering my next question. And this is something what a lot of people.
We're vibing, man. We're vibing.
Yeah. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about your lighting. So you started kind of saying some of those interesting aspects, how you approach lighting. But what I would like to ask you, what's the process of working with lighting? Do you have tons of modifiers, tons of different types of lighting, and you're trying to explore all of them? Or you have some kind of like, starting point set up and then you start kind of expanding throughout the photo shoot? How does process in during the session looks like in your case, like how you work with light and how you basically trying to find the best lighting for each portrait or each sessions you working on?
It's a good question. For me, one of the first things that I teach people about is the inverse square law, and that kind of informs a lot of what I do.
Okay.
So it's all about, and I try to use as few lights as possible.
Okay.
When I started out, I would shoot, I was really into, when I started getting into studio light, the first guy I kind of was looking at was Joel Grimes. And Joel, does like the side lights and all that stuff. And he had a very specific look. And I was like, oh, I want to learn how to do that. And so I would always shoot with like my strip boxes and then two lights hitting and giving that look. And it was cool. And but it was like, it wasn't kind of what I wanted to do, which was more of a naturalistic style of lighting. And to this day, what I'm always trying to do is to make lighting not look like a mall portrait, or like a Walmart or a JCPenney or whatever, you know what I mean? When like families would go or get their church pictures taken or whatever. And that to me looks very like studio. So what I've always really wanted to do was kind of capture something that looked a little more natural. And even though you might be working in a studio without any actual natural light, but just trying to make it not look like you're working in a studio and make it look like that light's actually coming from a window or, a lamp or something. And that goes back to my cinematography kind of background, or my wannabe cinematography background, which is, the light has to be motivated by something. You can't just have lights lighting somebody. Obviously you can, but especially if you get into editorial and whatever, it's like they're not worried about, oh, okay, is this person standing by a window or whatever. But when you're storytelling, there has to be a story that you're trying to kind of capture. And even if you don't capture it, that kind of helps you, it kind of informs you as to what you want to be telling. So I really I use two modifiers. And when I work in other people's studios, I just figure out how to create soft light and work with whatever they've got. But I primarily, my favorite, just on the technical side, my favorite, if I only had one modifier, it would be a 7-foot silver umbrella, just like in that picture, actually. So that's a 7-foot silver reflector with a diffuser, like or a PLM or whatever you want to call it. And then behind her, I had just an old Aries 650 Fresnel. And I think in the actual final image that I really liked from that, I didn't end up using the one with the Fresnel. But yeah, so I really love to use the 7-foot because you can use it to light the background. I love the fact that with an umbrella, the light's just going all over the place, and you can kind of turn it until you finally just get that really sweet, soft point, like, really feathered kind of in front of people. And then you can also shoot it so that a lot of the light is going off into the studio, and maybe you can bounce it into a V flat or something like that. I really love that. And then I work a lot with Nanlite, and I love their parabolic. And I didn't know I loved it until I worked with it. And I was like, oh, okay, this is the light I've been looking for. So I really like the parabolic. I usually don't work too much with grids. Unless I really want to combine light. But I like the light to kind of look like it's naturally kind of spilling onto the backdrop and filling the room and bouncing in a way that's kind of, there's a certain brightness when you have sunlight coming into a room that bounces back onto people. And so I try to have that kind of feel. And if I need to have more bounce, I'll just add another light and just create fake bounce, like shoot that light on the fill side into a white wall so that it kind of fills up that side a little bit more. And that also gives you kind of the ability to adjust it on the fly, or I'll just shoot a light behind me or whatever, But yeah, it really is kind of like the more I do it, the less I even kind of think about it. And I just come into it and I'm like, okay, well, we need to move this back a little bit, or even adding like a negative fill or a positive fill or whatever, you just start thinking like almost like a painter. That sounds a little pretentious, but it's like you're painting with light. And also you give names to, like, I know that if I would shoot into a silver umbrella versus shooting into a white one, it's like a big puff of air or a big puff of light, but it didn't have any punch to it. So I like the silver because it gives me highlights, but a lot of people don't like highlights. So it just depends.
Yeah. So tell me about, So what I'm going to ask you, and this is the something what I'm kind of very interested. So when you're shooting, are you checking those images constantly and you just, I don't know, looking at them at the big screen or back of your camera and try to adjust stuff, or you basically just shooting, trying to adjust stuff, because you see what's happening on the scene? What's the process look like there? Because I know all photographers have different approach to that.
Now that I have a mirrorless camera, when that really kind of changed things for me, because now I just shoot just shoot like crazy. So once I get my lighting right, I'll do a lot of like flow posing, because I like to capture somebody kind of in the middle of doing something. So like instead of saying, okay, hold a pose and just stand there, I'll usually get them to just kind of be moving their hands. And it's like there's always like a fan blowing and there's motion going on and everything. So I'll just, it doesn't bother me to just like shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. And sometimes I'll even, I'm terrible at getting my image crooked. So I'll have I'll have a whole, like I'll have 200 images and they'll be all just a little bit off to the side. And, we were talking about AI. I just did like one of my last images, I just cut it off by accident. Yeah. If you go to the top, I'll give away. A lot of like the AI stuff that I do now is just, okay. So like this image of Lily, this last one, I cut off her elbow. And so when I did no, not the one, go down and then to the left, just the close up. Yeah. So that's Lily, and she's a makeup artist in Sarasota. And she's her mom is a really great photographer too. And she came to my studio for the Sarasota workshop, and we were doing a lot of different things. I didn't have the light that I normally would use for that shoot at first, so we just started I started shooting a light into a reflector, and then we finally got the other light there. It was a constant LED.
Mm-hmm.
And we started doing more traditional kind of portrait lighting. But anyway, yeah, when I really liked this look because it just kind of hit me in a certain. I had like 5 or 6 that were almost identical, and if I was putting this, showing this somewhere, they'd be like, "Oh no, her hand is wrong and it's too light or whatever." Anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know about that. But I cut off her elbow, and that was like not in the shot. So when I made the image larger and I centered her, she was way off center in the original. The AI actually gave me her shoulder, her elbow back.
Okay.
So, and I don't like, I'm not proud of that, but it saved the image.
Yes.
But yeah, so I was able to kind of extend the image a little further, and I could have done it myself. I could have taken like a half an hour to rebuild that shoulder or that
Mhm.
elbow. Sorry, I don't know body parts.
Yeah.
That elbow somehow, with like clone stamping. I maybe used her shoulder or something. I don't know, but I could have
Yeah.
made it. But it's
Yeah.
just made things a lot
Easier.
quicker, and you don't have to spend 10 hours doing certain things.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect. So my next question is about your tonality of your images, because it's very specific. It seems like all those images, they're connected somehow. You have this really, really specific color, I would say, set, or the specific tonality, which also makes your images looks even more dramatic. And I know from my own experience, and I know a lot of photographers struggling with this a lot, is the colors. Can you tell me about the process? But you already kind of answered a little bit that question, because you came from this graphic designing world where you were already familiar with colors, and you could really see colors, I think, a little bit different way. But how did you implement that into your work, and how does color uh, tonality for your images evolve over the years?
Well, I definitely pay a lot more attention to it now than when I used to. I used to only have like one backdrop. I had like a white wall, and then I had a backdrop that I made that was kind of like dark gray, bluish. I was
Mhm.
trying to make something that looked kind of like that classic Oliphant background, and just using paint from Home Depot or whatever.
Mhm.
And so with those backdrops, pretty much anything skin tone just looks amazing, like with those darker
Mhm.
backdrops. And I would just use that for everything. So if you go back and look at my early stuff, it's always that. And then I started getting inspired by, really paying attention to contrasting the backdrop and thinking about, colors that are on the same side of the color wheel versus contrasting colors and everything. And it's really just a simple way to take the level of your images, take it to a next level. I love just, one of the things I really would love to do is go out and drive around and find, just walls or different colors of buildings and things like that, and just shoot against different, color backdrops. Um,
Mhm.
but that's the first thing. It's just kind of coming up with a color scheme. If I know I have a certain color in the studio, or if the model that I'm working with sends me a dress like a very specific color, then I can go on. It used to be Cooler.com, I guess Adobe Color or whatever they
Mhm.
use now. You can go and kind of find what the opposite on the color wheel is, or the contrasting colors, or
Mhm.
put together different kinds of colors, and just maybe not necessarily copy that, but just have something in that range. And then when
Mhm.
you're pushing and pulling it in Photoshop, you can make it even more kind of contrasty. Like I said, like backgrounds, I'll usually cool them down. Anything coming forward, highlights or whatever, I'll usually warm them up.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's kind of the shooting phase. And then when I'm retouching, there's a phase that's kind of just trying to make the images, first of all, look more like actual film.
Mhm.
Because we're working in a digital world, things look a little too crispy, they look a little too perfect. So you want to make, it's the same thing they do with films now. You can shoot in like 12K now, and you can have a
Yeah.
perfect looking image, and you can have it at 60 frames per second. But if you want it to look like film, it needs to be 24 frames per second. It needs to have that strobe effect. It needs to have film grain. It needs to look like you actually shot it on a film, so that there's that distance between, you know, it used to be that we tried as much as possible to get images as sharp as possible, and
Mhm.
everything perfect. But now that we're in the age that we can just take our phone out and have a perfect image, you have to kind of degrade the image. So I'll do things like adding a little bit of red to the blacks, like pushing up the reds and the blacks so that it actually looks like what happens with film emulsion after time. So in your brain, it's like the film becomes like, once it gets a little bit older, your images look a little more red, they look a little more faded. If you look at images from like the 1950s and 60s, we have this kind of almost kind of subconscious reaction to old images. That's one of the things that Instagram did when they started like adding filters, so you could make your image look instantly like a classic instead of just like a picture you took in that moment. And so I do a lot of that, and just pushing and pulling things, bringing up the blacks a little bit so it's more of like a matte look, playing with the curves. I use LUTs and I use presets, and I have a way of working with Photoshop that's kind of a little bit different than I've seen with a lot of other people, which is I'll do a bunch of different versions of the raw file with different presets and different things that I come up with in the moment, and start blending them together until I just feel like it's right. And so a lot of it is just kind of a sensitivity to color. And I don't know, like when I'm doing it, I'm going to do this, then this, then this, then this. It's about like discovering the image in the editing process. And so if I have to do like 10 images, it becomes more difficult to do that, because it's very hard for me to go and look at an image of mine and say, oh, okay, I know exactly what I did, I'm going to repeat that again. It's so when if I'm doing like 5 or 6 images, I have to edit them all at the same time and do the same things to them as I go through them.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the retouching process. And, like, I don't want to go into some like specific details, but what I'm curious about is, are you just basically sit down on the image and you're going through the entire process, or you just kind of like, doing this in parts? Like also how you selecting those images, because, you have to have some kind of good starting point, right? And that's, I think, the crucial part. And then you just basically elevating that image to different level with, retouching, color tonality and all this stuff. Could we talk a little bit about this process, how you approach this?
Sure. So I cull in Bridge. I don't ever touch Lightroom. It's too complicated for me. I don't understand like the filing system, and you have to import it. I just don't understand. So I use Adobe Bridge for everything. I go through and do my 1 stars, then 2 stars, then 3 stars, and then finally I'll get to 5-star images, and I'll maybe have 5 images. And then from those I'll choose, maybe I'll choose 2 of them and start editing them, and along the way I'll usually like one better than the other. That's if I'm just doing 1 image. But Bridge is like my main thing for culling. And it's important to be able to edit quickly, to get through your images and to cull quickly. So I just go through and I put it in review mode, or I'll just go through and I'm just like hitting the arrow key, and I go through really fast. I don't, if something hits me, I'm good with it. I don't analyze it. I don't say, okay, where's her, is her foot right? Is it cut off? Is it cropped? So, it's all about how it feels. And then I just get slowly more and more, narrowing it down, especially since I have like 1,000 images, just for one portrait session.
Okay.
Then I'll take that into Photoshop and do a few different versions of the raw file into different layers. I love, I do, a lot of skin retouching, but I'll kind of over retouch the skin. I'll do, all the different techniques that everybody knows, like frequency separation and dodging and burning and all that stuff. Especially the new remove tool is really good. And then I'll kind of go over the top with clearing up the face, and then I'll put the original back on top and just kind of start masking it out. So I avoid that kind of, I think, like mannequin look with people. And I don't always, sometimes I go overboard and sometimes I don't do quite as much, maybe I could have done a little bit more. But I always it's almost like that uncanny valley idea, if you can feel that it just looks fake, or you can feel the retouching. And this is one of the things that I look back at my old stuff and I just cringe, because I'm like, ugh, it's like so badly, like, you know, it's so obviously retouched, or the frequency separation was just like overkill. Like I was frequency separating like I was mad at somebody or something. I don't know, like with a vengeance.
Yeah.
And I thought it looked so cool. I was like, hey, look at all this cool Photoshop stuff I can do. And as I've developed, I've tried to get further away from that and make it look more natural. And then once I kind of have everything looking right, I'll do a few LUTs just to kind of like, you know, lookup tables, which is an adjustment layer. I'll try a few of those very lightly, you know, just to see if it adds a little something to it. You know, I have retouching videos that I sell online. So if anybody really wants an in-depth stuff, you know, you can see what I do. Yeah, so then there's that. And then sometimes I'll get to the end of the process and I really don't know if it looks good or not, because at that point my eyes are so tired. I just like, I can't see, you know, I'll push up the highlights and take down the shadows and just kind of keep playing with it until it just kind of looks right. And then like I'll get away from the image for a while. Sometimes I get like I need attention, so I'll upload it immediately, and I always end up regretting it because I'll look at it. You know, you have to look at it on your phone, look at it on a, you know, I have a nice monitor here, but you got to look at it on different devices now to make sure that it's not too dark. And my images are really dark. Sometimes it'll look amazing on my monitor, and then I'll upload it to Facebook, and it's like, you know, like you can't see it. But yeah, that's kind of the process, you know.
So I have actually another question for you, which is related to this, because this is kind of like a little of my experience, and it seems like we kind of thinking alike sometimes. I had this story where I had this client, you know, they rushed with those shots. They want to kind of get this done quickly, so we did the shoot. I came home, I had to retouch all those stuff, but I didn't send them off because, you know, he told me like, you know what, I can get them tomorrow morning. And I remember I was retouching those images at night. You know, it was dark, whatever. I was beat up, tired after the whole day of shooting, and you know, everything looks perfect that night. When I finished, like, you know what, looks like really good. And then I remember I woke up the next morning and I was just about to, you know, shoot off the email with those images, and I look at those shots and I'm just like, what the hell I've done? Like, this is just like absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
And that was the moment where I realized, you know what, the retouching also is affected by the mood we are in, the time of the day, and all sorts of different factors which influence how we look at the image. Did you experience that in your kind of retouching process sometimes, or?
Oh yeah, all the time, like literally every time.
Okay.
You know, I was doing a lighting class recently where I just thought I was nailing it. I thought it looked amazing, and I kept showing people the back of my camera, and I was like, "Oh my God, can you believe how cool this was?" And I had all this backlight going on, and the model was just like doing great, and everything was good. And I got back and started looking at my images in Bridge, and they were terrible. And I was like, "What was I thinking? Like the lighting isn't right on her face. She looks kind of ghoulish the way I've got her lit, and it just looked great on the back of my camera." And that's why, you know, I think a lot of people tether because they're worried about having that happen, you know. But yeah, it happens all the time. And I'll edit a bunch of images and think it looks amazing. And I mean, I woke up last night, like having an anxiety attack because I edited this one image and it just like, I was like, did it look like garbage? Like, did I think it looked really good? And then I uploaded it, and now I'm kind of changing my mind. And actually, I really like the image more now with like fresh eyes than I did then. But there have been times when, yeah, I think something looks amazing. And that's why, you know, another really important thing in this process is just to keep creating. And, you know, some of this, you can't really control. A lot of my favorite images, like nobody liked them. Nobody even paid attention to them. And I was like, wow, look at this. Isn't this cool? And nobody was like into it. And then I have other images that I think look really cheesy, and you know, they're very kind of like copies of you know, looks that have been done to death, and they're over photoshopped, and it just gets tons of attention and people like them. And so you have to kind of let go of it and see what the life is of those images, you know, on their own. And sometimes I'll put something up and it just falls flat, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just delete that and hope nobody remembers that. Like, you didn't see that image. Just forget you
Yeah.
saw that.
Yeah. But don't you think we have kind of like a little bit of different connections with those images, especially, like if you do the photo shoot, with the model, there is some story behind it, there is some connection. Then you spend hours in Photoshop looking at the same image for forever, retouching, creating. And
Yeah.
then, and people nowadays, they just like look at it for a second and they either get connected with it or they don't. And I have
Sure.
exactly the same experience. Those images which I really like, people just like don't care at all, and you just like whatever. But I think also we have this kind of different, well, connection is a one thing, but I think also the problem with the images nowadays is because we see them and there's a story behind it, with most people don't see it, right? Like I remember I had this interview with one of those he was, I think, from London, and he was telling me like he did this photo shoot where he spent months to getting all these like little props, and he dedicated so much work into this that the image had so much meaning to him. And then he says exactly the same thing. I did the photo shoot, he thought like, oh, it looks great, and then the images got like no attention whatsoever. And he's like this is insane. But I'm like, you know what, maybe sometimes we look at them and we have completely different connection with this, that people who looking at those images, and especially nowadays with
Sure.
social media, people just scroll through like thousands of images daily. And sometimes there are things which we don't even see, right? And they sometimes they feel something about it, and they get engaged, they get connected, they respond, they, I don't know, they comment, you name it.
Yeah, I think that you have to disconnect from the final. I look at all these like filmmakers, like Francis Ford Coppola is one of my favorite directors, and his latest film, from what I hear, is just terrible.
Mhm.
And it doesn't change the fact that he's a brilliant artist.
Yeah.
It's like your favorite band. Um, are they continuously like, there's bands who like they make one or two albums, and then there's
Mhm.
other bands who are just like they're constantly writing and recording and putting stuff out because they like the process of it.
Mhm.
So if you just will kind of focus on enjoying the process and getting into your studio and creating, um, then you're just gonna like, some of the stuff is gonna hit with other people, other things are gonna fall flat. It's just kind of part of being an artist. But the being an artist is about the enjoyment of the creation of it. And you can't really control how people react to it, and if people don't connect with it. I love attention as much as anybody else, probably more. So one of the things that there's things that aren't artistic at all that drive me, that like there's competition with other photographers. I see people that I'm constantly seeing their work and it's blowing my mind, and I'm like, it makes me so mad. It just makes me like, okay, I'm gonna one up that one, and it's a healthy thing. They're my friends of mine, but I look at their pictures and I'm like, you know I know having that healthy competition is good,
Good.
and I don't mind being jealous of it. I know that's the motivator. It doesn't feel good, but it motivates you to get into the studio.
Yeah.
Also, the need for attention. The need for people to be putting stuff up there in front of people. That's also a driving force. Or fear is a driving force, or
Mhm.
anxiety. These things that we always consider as like negatives are actually the best thing for you when you're an artist. And so I've had plenty of people tell me that their prime motivating factor of creating a lot of their work is just like spite, like just wanting to show people, like, stop, you know making fun of my, or in their head, that battle that they have. It's like, I just want to show people what I can do. And as an artist, you just you have this creative way of thinking, and you need to just like create. So I would say just like focus on creating and not so much on the final product. I mean, when I
Mhm.
first started, nobody was paying attention to me. I might I hate to put it like this, but I mean, I might have gotten maybe 4 or 5 likes on something, and
Mhm.
then all of a sudden I just I lucked into a shoot and I did something that was pretty cool, or I got shared by somebody or whatever, and all of a sudden I got like 100 people that saw my image, and I was like, wow, 100 people, and that was like a big deal for me.
Yeah.
um, but the thing, it's not about like that. It's got to be about like just creating and getting into your studio. And like when we talk about failure, the way that I look about like messing up something, like I've gone into plenty of shoots and I was just kicking myself after I left, and I was like, why didn't I do this, and why did we do that? And she had this horrible, like, necklace on, or had this, the dress didn't match, or it looked kind of cheesy, or my lighting was terrible, or whatever. And that kind of kicking yourself is absolutely essential for going in the next time and not making those mistakes and being like, oh, okay, I'm going to watch 20 YouTube videos on posing for this kind of shoot, or look at images in Pinterest and like, copy them into a folder. And then next time I'll have that in my head when I'm shooting. And so that's why going into the studio so much is so important, because you need to have those mistakes in order to have that kind of really, really deep guttural reaction of shame and fear and like horror that you screwed up the other shoot so bad. Yeah. And I don't think we do things unless, I mean, one of the things that, when I'm teaching, I know that I can spend all day talking about things, especially for newer photographers. I can say all this stuff that I've learned, but until they start shooting, until they start actually having those frustrations, they're not going to listen to you. So I like to get people shooting, and then they get frustrated and they're like, well, why isn't this working? And then you can kind of be like, well, this is what I do, and this is how I solve this problem. But you have to have the problem of like a problem you can't solve first. And then you go and you watch a class, or you get on YouTube, or you read a book or whatever. And in order to like, you can't just like watch videos and then arrive on the set and be ready. You have to go through those issues.
I think it's like a similar, like a workout, right? Like you cannot get good at running by watching videos and reading books about it, right? You have to just go out and you have to start moving the legs, and then you will get better eventually. And I think this is exactly the same when it comes to photography. You cannot just reading stuff and watching videos and listening to people. You have to get in, you have to pick up the camera, and you have to start shooting. And I think a lot of photographers don't take the practice is the best way to learn photography, right? That's the way actually I see it. And I think sometimes it looks easy when someone else who has a lot of experience doing it, because they know all those little nuances and they know how to approach it. As soon as they pick up the camera, all of a sudden this whole thing becoming challenging. And I think you said that a few while ago that we should copy other people, but what I mean by that is we should just try to how to figure out what they went through and try to like do something similar. And that's where we can really realize how hard it is. I remember back in the days I was also trying to like oh, I love this image, how I can kind of replicate this. And it's like, oh, it's easy. It's, two lights, whatever. And then you start shooting. It's like, shit, doesn't even look close to this whole thing, right?
Right.
So
yeah, I used to do that with, I would watch Creative Live all the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah, it's easy, And then I tried to replicate it in my studio, and I was like, didn't look anything like what they had done.
Yeah, impossible.
One thing that you remind me of is I remember two people, one was Edison, and I think they were like when he invented the light bulb. They asked him like, how did you do it? And he was like, he did it every wrong way. So the only way left was the correct way. So yes. I always liked that. But also Joel Grimes, I remember a class I was watching of his, and he was like, I'm not better than you. I've done it wrong so many times that I finally do it this way because I've done it all the wrong ways, and I love that way of approaching it.
Yeah, I think, with the light bulb, there was this famous quote, like I've tried it 1,000 things and then the one thing which worked, right? So that's why I'm ahead everybody else. Okay, so let's pedal back a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your interaction with your subject, because you can have great lighting, you can have great retouching skills, but if you cannot connect with your subject and you cannot just get the stuff what you kind of going after, the image is not going to work. So tell me a little bit about how you interact with your subject, how you work with your subject. What's the process, kind of getting that connection with them? Because, in portraiture, connection, I think, is the main thing to get the right image. So tell me how you work with your subject. And then, another thing what I want to point it out, because this is, again, my own experience, each person is different. And I think that's why maybe portraiture and headshot photography is really addictive because you're just getting something new every time, and it's never ending kind of learning process for us, and we always get something different, something new, something unique. But I want to focus mainly on how you work with your clients, with your
Mhm.
subject, how you basically make that connection throughout a photo shoot to get the images which you're getting.
Well, I mean, I guess a lot of it is just your natural personality.
Mhm.
Every shoot that I have is different. Every interaction is different. Some of them I just are a lot of fun, and kind of feel that we're both kind of on the same page and we're having fun with it, and they're, kind of trusting me. And I think that just being enthusiastic and being excited about it and letting them know how amazing you think everything's looking. Um, Sometimes you have to fake it a little bit. Like if you're frustrated, you just have to be like, "Oh my God, that's so good." You know what I mean? Just like, but you do have to be in control of things, and
Mhm.
they do want to know that you're in good hands. So whatever comes out naturally in your personality, just kind of go with that. But I really, I so focus on every aspect of the person from the moment they walk in. I try to make them feel comfortable. I try to be kind of a little goofy. I'm a big dude. I'm 6'4" and I'm husky. um, I got the beard. I kind of look, like maybe a little intimidating. So I try to kind of be as goofy as possible, and I mean, that's also just me. Egos really have no place when you're doing this stuff.
Mhm.
I know ego sometimes finds its way into photography, but and I just like to, you have to kind of like adapt to what they're comfortable with.
Mhm.
So if sometimes they just want you to do everything and to come up with everything. Um, but there is kind of a warm up period. So usually people will come in, if I've never worked with them before, um, you just kind of have to try different things. A lot of times people will not be totally comfortable with there's two sides of it. One of them is you put somebody in front of your camera, and your lights and everything, and they don't have any idea what to do. So you just kind of give them some basic posing, creating angles, triangles, da 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 da, like all the different things. And they will slowly, like the first probably maybe even hour, 30 minutes are going to be kind of, a lot of times you'll feel that jaw, that kind of like clenched jaw or whatever. There's just something about the images don't feel comfortable.
Right. Yeah.
And I kind of got this a little bit when I was learning how to direct actors, which I don't know a whole lot about, but the main thing was just making them not be kind of self-conscious. And so I, just keep talking, keep it really light. I don't do things like a countdown, unless I'm doing like a dress toss or something like that, which I really don't do a lot of. But yeah, I think the main thing that they want to know is that they're not wasting their time, and that you're really happy with what they're doing. They want to feel beautiful. They want to feel like, and my images a lot of times aren't about beauty. They're more about emotion. So, uh, we're not really creating glamorous images. We're creating something that's more about a feeling, or kind of trying to capture like an emotional crescendo of like a glass cage of emotion. Uh,
Uh,
so I don't know. I mean, and some people, don't like me, and like I have photo shoots where I work with people, and they're just like, I don't know, but I feel like they kind of find me annoying.
mhm.
Um, and you just have to kind of power through everything. Not everybody is for everybody.
Yeah.
And I used to do stuff that now I think about and I cringe. I used to tell jokes when I would do photo shoots, and now I'm like, ugh,
Mhm.
that's so like I don't know, amateurish. But I think the most important thing is just being excited about it, and being excited about what you're creating, and just having that kind of like, looking at the back of your camera and being like, oh my God, that looks amazing, and just being excited about, what they're doing and what you're creating together.
Yeah. So my next question, I want to go to our current state of photography.
Okay.
We touched this a little bit before we kind of get on live. I want to talk a little bit about AI. I know this whole thing is just knocking the door from every possible corner. There is massive debate over this. People fighting back and forth. It seems like this technology gonna um, disrupt our industry a little bit. I think it's already is disrupting as we speak. But what is your take on it? Should we be scared of this? Should we be more optimistic? Should we take advantage of it and just kind of dive into this and see what this technology allows us to do? Because I've whenever I hear photographers, there's two opposite sides, right? There is one side which is completely for it. They're looking at it. Okay, you know what? This is just a natural path of photography. But there's some of them who are terrified, and it seems like they're so scared that they believe that this is end of photography and this whole thing is going to completely take over. What do we do? I know some of those folks, they make a living out of photography, and maybe that's the fear is coming from. So how you look at it, what would be your take on what it's happening right now? And like, I'm not saying, if you could predict the future, but how you see this whole thing's going to evolve in the next, I would say 5-10 years.
It's interesting because I think that like what ends up happening, it's funny. It's like people who are against it. It's like, who cares if you're against it or not? It's here.
Mhm.
It exists. It's part of the world now, and it's going to be more and more. I mean, it's going to affect everything from medicine, and in a lot of ways, it's great. I mean, I love the Terminator movies, you know what I mean? But I mean, I hope they don't, I hope they're good overlords, and they treat us well. But I think for the most part, AI is amazing. There's a lot of problems with the copyright stuff or whatever. But I'll put it like this, I feel like every generation has something like this where you could go back 20 years and hear people talking about, what do you think about the internet, and what do you think about digital cameras, and what do you think about Photoshop and whatever, and they're like, oh well, they're not real photographers because they don't do this and that and whatever. And I think in the future, future generations, like my son's generation, is just going to grow up in a world where AI is just doing stuff for them, and they're just going to adapt and they're going to use it. Like I'm already using it for certain things. And there's probably just going to be some sort of like hybrid, I mean, it's kind of the same thing that happened when photographers, back in the early 1800s, like there's this, one of my favorite movies is this, that I highly recommend is, I think it's Mike Nichols, Mr. Turner. And it's got a scene where he's one of the most amazing painters in the world and everything. And he goes in and gets a portrait taken. And there's just kind of this magic about portraits. Is it going to end painters or whatever? And you could say, okay, yeah, there are still painters, portrait painters, but now I can just go in and do the same thing, with a camera or whatever. It's a different thing, so AI is just going to be a part of it. And how much, there's also the concept of how hard it is to do something when you're talking about artwork. So the value of something is usually directly related to how hard it is to create the thing. So if you're able to just go in and do a scan of a person's face and then put it into like a 3D rendering and have it look identical to somebody going to portrait photographer, on the one hand, people are going to stop going as much to portrait photographers, but they're also, everybody's going to have amazing portraits. So it's going to change the market and dilute it. And certainly the stuff that I do will be kind of like a dinosaur, like actually going in and taking a picture of somebody who's actually there will be kind of like going and taking a picture with, film or I don't know, but I don't know, who knows? And then there'll be all these kind of goofy kids who are like, oh, I still use a digital camera, like I see a bunch of Gen Zers out there that, they're discovering 35 millimeter and taking, pictures with old cameras and stuff. And I think that's cool. It's just funny for guys like me who's like, now we finally got all this technology that we dreamed about. We dreamed about being able to shoot in 24 frames per second. When we had camcorders, we dreamed about being able to shoot in, forget about 4K. I mean, we dreamed about shooting in 720 or 1080. I mean, that was like,
yeah.
and now it's just it's ubiquitous, as my son says. You know, everything's like easy. So when it becomes easy, nobody cares about it anymore. It used to be really amazing to be able to shoot video with a 50 millimeter at like f1.8, and now anybody can do it, and you have it on your phone. So again, I go back to this whole idea of like, is it difficult to do? I've got a friend who, you know, does photorealistic portraits, and his portraits, or not even portraits, just his paintings, look like pictures that came from a camera, and they're amazing. You get close to them, and it's like, oh wow, this is actually, you know, painted. And he does very, you know, financially he does very well because he's got this this niche, you know, of like he creates these amazing images. And so it's the same thing. Like photography has completely changed in the last 20 years. If you look at wedding photography from like when my family members got married, you know, and I look at back at those pictures, they're just terrible. And now you look at wedding pictures and they look like they came out of a movie, and the videos from the weddings are just like, they have these amazing drone shots and tracking shots, and it looks like you're watching, you know, something directed by a you know, a famous film director, you know. So yeah, it's AI is just going to change all that, and it's going to make things easier. But I think people also have an idea of like what's real and what's fake and whatever. You could look at a lot of my stuff and be like, oh well, he just retouched that, and that's why it looks that way. So, you know, and I use AI. I don't use it so much for, like, I know a few people that'll put like a bird in somebody's hair, or they'll add something that wasn't there or whatever. I don't really do a lot of that, but you know, there's no, the only thing I don't like about it is that I don't know where that's coming from. Like I did the other day, I did like I was trying to do skin smoothing, and it literally changed the face of the person I was working into some other dude. He just like appeared there. Like, and I'm like, where did this guy come from? Where does he, you know, like, does he know that he just magically appeared in my Photoshop? But
I think AI is really far, and I tried out this on so many different levels, that AI is really far when it comes to, you know, human face expressions, you know, replacing any human parts. It's just completely lost. I think it's really far from, you know, being even good enough to be something that we could use it. It's good with, like, you know, patterns, and then, you know, something which is blurred, and, you know, some of those little things. But when it comes to the, you know, working on a human, it's completely different story. And I think, so that's one point. But the other point, what I want to make here, and I think I just want to also your thoughts on this, that, you know, people can also go and get those, you know, AI images of themselves, whatever, but they're never going to get the experience, right? And I think that's what it's another huge element of portrait photography, where people coming to you, they are not only coming for the images, but getting that experience working with you, right? The creative process, there's something that, you know, you create something which never existed before. And I think that's maybe we should focus a little bit more, and I'm not saying this is the selling point, but something that, you know, people should be aware that, you know, working with professional photographer, it's like, you know, I don't know, going to the painter and standing for, I don't know, 5 hours, and then getting that piece of art done. And maybe that's going to keep us in business.
It's kind of like creating, you know, imagine putting some sort of AI image of yourself up on the wall, you know, and it's not, you know, it's not actually you.
Yeah.
It's a computer. Like, so, you know, when I was younger, there were pictures of my family members. There was this great picture of my grandma. And I absolutely loved it. And you could see it was big enough. It was like blown up, and you could see all the, like, the moles on her arm, and, you know, all the wrinkles and everything. And that was the reality, that like there's a connection to that, you know. And imagine if that picture of my grandma was like, I knew that was a digital hand, you know what I mean? Or that was a digital version of her face. It just, to me, it doesn't have the same feel. So I don't know how it's going to adapt. There's certain things that have kind of become comfortable in the digital space, you know, like music has become something, but we're still kind of making, like, I don't know how good the AI will be that'll actually trick you into like thinking things are real. Like, we live in a completely, like, kind of fake world now, though, of like, you know, you go into buildings and the bricks are all fake, and the interior is all fake, and it's fake this and you know what I mean? So we're kind of like fooling ourselves, or into thinking that we're in this reality, and things are like fake rough now. They're fake. Like, you buy jeans now and they look like they're 20 years old, and they have holes in them and everything. So there might be an aspect of that too, that AI is like, okay, I'm gonna trick you so well that you're not even going to realize that this is fake.
Yeah, but I think as soon as it's fake, you the way I see it, and I think you brought like really interesting point about your grandma, that if you would know this is digitally created image, you don't really even have emotional connection to this at all. It's just getting completely cut out, and it's an image, but it's not reality. It's not something that I'm emotionally connected to this. And I also, a few days ago, I talked to somebody, and they told me that right now they're also working on all those social media platforms, especially those professional ones, that if you have a fake headshot, it's going to be picked up by AI, and you really can't use it, because it's just I'm not saying it's a lying, but it's something that they try to also protect, that it has to be somehow you. So and then you also brought a really interesting point. There is still, we're fighting with the legal part of it, right? That there's no there's no gray area. It's something that it still have to be developed. And I think that the technology is progressing so quickly that legislation is not even able to pick up, to follow up with everything what is happening in that sphere.
Yeah, I think that sometimes you don't know exactly where the flow. I mean, I always think back to like Lars Ulrich, from Metallica, fighting over digital downloads and stuff. It's like, sometimes you just got to realize when you're in a losing kind of battle. So it's like, AI is here. I mean, people are going to use it however they want to. I don't pretend to have some sort of like idea of what's going to happen with it. I use it for a few little things here and there, but I mean, you gotta say, it's like, I could be totally against it, but then all of a sudden they invent something that takes away. I mean, there's already programs that will clear skin for you, and the funny thing about it is, I've been offered, people like sponsorships and stuff for plugins for Photoshop that would probably help me out a lot, but I just enjoy the process of doing it so much that it's like, I mean, or Actions. I almost never use Actions. And they're like, oh, well, it'll speed up the process. And I'm like, I like the how long it takes to do it. I want to be retouching as long as I can, because I'm in the zone. And obviously, there's a lot of great tools out there. I mean, there's one, Portraiture, I think, is one that will immediately just clear up skin. Or you can get Actions that will do all those things, and then you just mask them out or whatever. Especially as an educator, I don't like to teach using plugins, only because now you have to go buy that plugin. And I think you can do everything just, and I'm old school, I've been working with Photoshop since version 2.5,
Okay.
So I do it the same way, that I've always done it. And I think those are kind of the same thing as AI. I mean, Actions are kind of like AI, if you buy somebody's Actions and they put everything into different folders, and you do it that way, and you don't really understand what's going on underneath, then that's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I have one more question for you. Let's sums up this whole thing. Tell me, what would be your advice to photographers who are starting off? They want to get into this industry, they want to create portraits, headshots, whatever. What would be your advice to those people, especially nowadays, where the market is extremely saturated? You have to really work countless hours to not only learn the skills and get all this knowledge, but also it takes a lot of time to put yourself out there so people can even recognize you. So what would be your advice to those people who just starting off, and they see the passion, they see they have some kind of talent, they want to learn this stuff? I know you're educator as well, so you talk about it probably constantly, because people who are coming to you, they want to learn from you, and they want to get to your level. So what would be your advice on this?
All I know is really kind of what worked for me. I got to an age, there's just sometimes when it's like the resistance to going out and doing something becomes less than the kind of oncoming reality that you're getting older, and that if you wait another 10 years, it's like, when are you going to do it? You know what I mean? And so I think the most important thing for any new photographer, if you're like me, is the fear of embarrassing yourself and the fear of realizing that you're just not very good yet, and thinking that somehow you're just going to be good from the very beginning. You don't just pick up a guitar and play. It takes years of just like noodling around and figuring stuff out. So it really is that simple. It's just like, just get out and, shoot as much as possible. Go outside, shoot at, get a Sunseeker app or something, go out, shoot with your friends. Do absolutely anything that you can to just shoot as much as possible and make mistakes, because it's like, you just have to make a lot of mistakes to get better. There's no way around it. And find out what you enjoy doing, and don't listen to people who are like, call themselves, the photography police. There's plenty, I'm not going to name any organizations, but there's plenty of organizations that like tout themselves as being like, oh, we're the
judge.
We're the last word in photography. So what we say, I mean, I don't listen to any of that stuff. And I do stuff, I've entered a few competitions and was like last place, because I just like, I don't care about the stuff that they thought was important. Find people that inspire you. I really loved, the obvious people like Richard Avedon and Peter Lindbergh and Annie Leibovitz and those people, get inspired by those people, and, let them kind of intimidate you, like let them like be like, oh, be in awe of like what they're doing. And, regardless of what you think about them, find whatever people inspire you. And then try to see what their setups are and watch their every single, people are like, what class should I take? I'm like, take every class, take every single class, watch every single video, like surround yourself in learning, and get out and shoot, and then feel miserable about it. And, kind of feel bad the whole ride home, and then get home and watch 20 videos about how to fix that thing that you did wrong. And then start scheduling sessions, even if you don't want to do it. Just find people and try every single day. If you have from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, or if you have morning free or whatever, just start booking stuff. Don't think about it. Just like start booking it, and also know how you work creatively. What you're going to be able to do. Don't try to be somebody else. Go into all the things that embarrass yourself about yourself, all the things that you maybe bring up since your childhood, of like you've always felt like you were weird or whatever. All those are like the things that are going to make your photography connect with other people, and just do whatever feels right. And also, you're not going to really find your style. It takes like 2 or 3 years of shooting to finally kind of find your style. And just do what feels right. Don't worry about what other people say, or if people don't like what you do. Just keep doing it, and you'll eventually get better. And one of the things that I always say is like, you could take the most brilliant photographer, and he only shoots maybe, let's say he does one shoot every month. And then you take a really kind of somebody who doesn't know anything about photography, has never taken a picture, doesn't know anything about lighting, exposure, whatever. But he goes and he shoots every single day something different. He goes and shoots a model, or he goes and shoots a sunset, whatever. At the end of that month, the person with no talent, quote unquote, whatever, is going to have so many more amazing images. So it just becomes like a numbers game too. It's like, the more you shoot, the more like luck you're going to have, the more little moments you're going to have where you're like, oh my God, how did we even do that? If you look at somebody's portfolio on Instagram, you have to ask yourself, okay, was the image that they came up with, was that their intention, or did they just happen upon that? Or was it a moment of luck, or did the model just pull something, out of their butt that they were like, oh my God, that's amazing. You don't know if that was their intention, or it's just like they got lucky or whatever. And I would be willing to bet that most people's best images are a combination of, being prepared, having done it for a while, but also a lot of luck in that moment, and just the lighting was just working and everything was just in that right moment. And it doesn't mean that you don't have hundreds of decent images, but just to find like those, one person, I always thought this was kind of hyperbole, but one guy said, if you get 3 images a year that are just amazing, you're like ahead of the game. And I always thought that was kind of ridiculous. And I realized it's true. Like probably my top 10 images have taken me 10 years to make. And that doesn't mean I don't have a lot of images that I really love, but like the ones that really stand out is like my favorite ones. And those shoots were just like every other shoot, and those moments were just, but for some reason those shots just were amazing. And when it's funny because I always, see like people's workshops and everything, and they've always got those same like 4 or 5 images behind them that was like the best shot that they ever took, that they got lucky with and whatever. And they're like, hey, let me teach you how to make this shot. And it's like, you make it by spending 10 years being a photographer and having that one moment where it just like everything just worked right, and you had the perfect model and their hair just blew in the right way, and for whatever reason the lighting was right. But it really is kind of a numbers game. You just have to keep shooting and shooting, and not
you're just creating opportunity, right? You're just working towards this I would say ideal moment, and those moments, they don't come often, as you said. Once in a while you have this split of the second where you just push the button and everything kind of works well, and then you get the shot.
And I always say, whenever I'm just kind of not in the mood to shoot, and I've set up a photo shoot, and it's like I'm just kind of not in the mood for whatever reason, I always think to myself, maybe one of the images that I shoot in this session is going to be one of the best images, that I ever create, and it happens sometimes. Sometimes you just like a random session, just kind of practicing or whatever, and you just create something that, and I can't tell you what it is, there's just certain images of mine that the image before it and the image after it would not have had that same impact, but it's just like in that moment, it just connected with people. And I never know when it's going to happen.
Yeah. And one thing also, what you pointed out, which I think is very interesting, and I have the same approach, you just keep shooting and you're creating a lot of images, right? So it's not like, I've been hearing from many photographers, and whenever I ask them, like, so let's say you have a, I don't know, portrait or headshot session, it's like, yeah, I took like 20 pictures, and then, I pick one. And then like for me, 20 pictures on the session is like absolutely, you don't even starting, like, it's something that it's I can't even imagine having 20 images on one session, because it's just like you have to just warm up. You have to.
I shoot 20 images before they even get there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's getting the lighting right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I have a friend here who he's from the film days, and I'm always a little intimidated when I talk with people who used to work for like Vogue, and he used to shoot for Playboy and all these other magazines and stuff, but back when it was film. And I was talking to him about how I felt kind of a little bit of a poser, because I would just shoot and shoot and shoot, and at the end of a portrait session, we'd do a few different looks, and I was like, I'd have like 1,000 images, and I thought it was ridiculous. And he was like, 1,000 images, even in the film days, was nothing, and just, he's like, I remember I did a photo shoot for like some Vanity Fair or something like that. And he gave them like 1,000 images, and we're talking about film, like a bunch of different like film rolls. And they looked at him like, what are you doing? Like, how the hell are you going to have the image for the magazine with just 1,000 images? Like, it was nothing for them. And it just kind of made me feel a little bit better about the way that I work. Or I think about guys like David Fincher or Stanley Kubrick, who would just shoot and shoot and shoot over and over again the same scene. And I think it wasn't because it was kind of because they didn't really know how to get what they wanted, or they wanted to have a bunch of different versions. And so nobody's going to tell you that David Fincher or Stanley Kubrick are crappy directors. And Stanley Kubrick was also a brilliant photographer. So I kind of look at it like that. Like I just want to get back an open bridge and have tons of options. I don't want to be like, if I had 20 images, I would just be like, that's just stupid. Like, you're shooting on an SD card, get as many images as you can, and then go from there, like when you're in editing mode, and then you're going to be able to kind of go through, sometimes it almost looks like video.
Yeah.
And, unless you just hate doing that, and then get it right on the day and shoot tethered and do that. But I just like to show up with my camera. When I travel, I just shoot with a 50 millimeter, and I try to show that you don't need like all the really expensive stuff, and I just start shooting. And if I'm tethered and if I'm doing all that, it's like, it's great. I know a lot of photographers who do that, and that's, but I like to just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and just do is get as close as I can. Um, and then I'm not really going to know what I have until I get into post. And then I get into post, and sometimes it looks much better than I thought it would, or sometimes it looks terrible.
Yeah.
And I have to really, that's when my Photoshop training kind of takes it over. And I'm like, okay, I can take this really, I didn't quite light it right, but I can kind of fudge it a little bit in Photoshop,
Yeah.
which a lot of people would say it's just, I'm a bad photographer. It's just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
but that's how I work,
Yeah.
and it's like, if people want to learn how I work, I don't try to hide
Hide it. Yeah.
the things that that I don't feel like I'm good at. And so when people come to me and say, hey, I really like your work and everything, I'm like, it's just, I have a lot of images to choose from, and I do a lot of reworking, sometimes a lot of retouching to get it to that point. So there's no like, a lot of times they think it's like maybe some trick or some sort of magic or whatever, and it's like, no, it's a lot of hard work.
And I'm glad you're saying this, because you know what? I had situations where I felt so guilty about, doing so many images, and people like, you know what, you're putting so much mileage on the camera, you should say. I'm like, yeah, but I'm glad you're saying
Who are
this.
they to say that? It's like that's what kind of makes me frustrated sometimes, is that I do work with a lot of people at different levels, and some people, I remember I was talking to one woman who, she's a great photographer, but I told her about the fact that I'll take 1,000 or sometimes 2,000 images in a session, and we're changing looks and everything. It's not just one thing,
Yeah, yeah.
but I'm trying different things, and as long as they're cool with it, I'll just keep working with it or whatever. And it completely changed her look on things, because everybody up to that point had told her, oh, well, you should only take maybe 100 images in the shoot and whatever. And I'm like, who's telling you that? Like, who are they to give that advice? Like, do whatever works for you. If you get, the only thing that matters is that you have an amazing image. It doesn't matter if it takes you 1,000 shots or if it takes you 5 or maybe 10,000 shots. Like, you as an artist need to just do whatever works for you. I might not be able to just pull out of the back of my head an amazing pose. I might have to work at getting there and whatever. And it's like, if that works for you, then it works for you. People, the proof for me has been that, I do have people that really like want to interview me and talk to me about how I work. And it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing something right. But a lot of the things that I do kind of run contrary to what I've learned from other educators or other schools or whatever.
Yeah. I think, sometimes people try to push their own agenda on it, right? And then, they try to tell you how they work. But also, the one thing what I want to bring up, and this is, I'm sure you feel exactly the same. It's not only, taking a lot of photos gives you advantage of have more options, but I also think that each session is like a workout, because you have to warm up, your subject has to warm up, and then you have this time of photo shoot where you getting into this kind of flow, like how you say it, this the flow state, right, where you just kind of like creating stuff, you do the ideas coming in, and and then you start kind of really producing interesting stuff. But like when we talk, you're doing 20 images or whatever, even 100 images, you don't even have the time to warm up your eyes and warm up your brain to the photo shoot, and then that's why I think that a lot of people just losing the battle, because they, before they even start creating something interesting, they cutting this whole thing off, right? I'm done, I got shots, it's technically good, and they don't look for this emotional impact of the image. They're not looking for, as we said, this opportunity where you have this, like the specific moment where you capture something very, very unique, right? So I think people should listen to this and take this as advice, that just work as much as you can, just go through everything what it's possible, and then when you burn out, and I have those, like, I don't know how you feel after photo shoots, but I shoot for about a couple hours, 2-3 hours, and then your brain is on fire. Like, I feel like I'm just run a marathon, because
Oh yeah,
it's
I'm
just
done.
like, yeah, you're done for the day. Yeah. I had this actually situation a few weeks ago where I shoot like a very, very long session, and the client left, and I literally went back home, just laid on the bed and just like fall asleep, like like a baby after like a good meal or something, right? I was just like, And then I woke up, I'm like, what
More
happened?
milk.
But your brain needed this, like, this is a roller coaster for, because you constantly focused, you're thinking, you changing things, you're adjusting, your brain is on kind of like this high mode where is creating this interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you just never know at what moment, you're trying to do a bunch of things and you're all like excited and you're moving lights around and you're doing, yeah, I literally just collapse onto the floor after everybody leaves. And, it's, I have to learn the hard way to just schedule one shoot per day because I've had it so that another person was arriving right after,
Oh my
you
God.
know, one shoot. And I was just like, like, here we go. All right, let me go get some, some
Coffee or something.
Gatorade or something like
Yeah,
some.
yeah, 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 for sure.
But yeah, it's tough, and it's also tough to. I usually try to wait a few days to edit too,
Mhm.
so I can turn on my editing brain and look at it with fresh eyes. And it's sometimes it's like Christmas, Sometimes you're just like, I'll even forget about stuff that we did or outfits that we tried or this or that, and I'm like, oh man, I forgot about this, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
still
yeah,
have literally probably hundreds of shoots that I could go back and find.
yeah,
I might have already taken my best picture, but I just haven't like I haven't gone through those images yet because we
yeah,
tried so many different things. But it's trouble because people will stop too soon
yeah. Hmm.
and they won't get the lighting right. And I mean, I have to tell myself sometimes, I'm like, I'm a good photographer. Like I have to reassure myself that I'm not like a hack or whatever, because that does come into my head when I'm shooting and it's just not happening. There are times when we'll be 2 hours into it and I'm like, I don't think I have anything here. One of the best things that I ever saw was a photographer that I really, really look up to, is one of my favorites. And I got to see her shooting, and she was like, these all look terrible. I got one shot out of this whole thing.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, you can do that. Okay. You can be like a great photographer, but also have a bad day and have, a
Yeah, yeah,
shoot that just nothing's working, or you know what I
yeah.
mean? And so it just kind of changed my mindset. And I stopped thinking about these photographers that I think about being so great as like, oh, they know some sort of magic trick, or they know something that I don't do, or they can see something that I don't see. And now it's like, now that I'm kind of a little bit more on the other side, I'm like, okay, well, this is how I do it, and these are all the mistakes I make. And I I think that sometimes photographers will want to hide that side because they're ashamed of it, and they want everybody. There is something kind of, you know, you get that dopamine of everybody being like, oh, even when you tell me, hey, it's great, to talk to you and everything. Of course, my ego is just like, oh, well, hey, you know what I mean? So I instantly don't want to tell you how crappy I am with certain things, because I want to maintain that illusion. If I'm posting only my best images and everything, I'm trying to create that illusion that everything that I do turns to gold and I just have this magical touch and everything. And it's the same thing with like musicians. It's like, you don't if you look at an album, or back in the day when we had albums, they would create like 100 songs or maybe 30 songs, and only 8 songs went onto the record. Like the Beatles, when they were doing stuff, they had tons of songs that they never ended up using, just because they were like trying to create another one, this one, and then some of them were like, okay, these are the good ones, these are the ones that we just will throw
Yeah.
out. And it's the same thing with all artists.
Hmm.
Just get used to like, okay, just the cream rises to the top, or whatever. Like the best of the best will be what you show people. If I showed people like some of my bad images, they just stop. They'd be like, okay,
Yeah.
whatever. But
But
it's
that's
important to see that. I love seeing great photographers, you know, struggling. And I wish they would be more kind of open about that. But it's like,
Yeah. No, it's, you know what, it's a fantastic point, because people see, as you said, just the essence of of your work, right? They don't see those hundreds of thousands of pictures which didn't work. They see the one which worked. And then they basically make all this judgment based on those top images. But nobody asks you how you got there, right? Like, how did you get to that image, and how much work went into this? I think I did this little post recently. There's like a pyramid, right? Like, there's like the top, that's what people see, and then like entire work behind it,
yeah,
nobody sees this whole thing at all. And I'm glad we talk about it, because that's something that, as you said, nobody sees it, right? They just see the essence of this very hard, long hours, countless times where we have to spend on this. And they don't see the big picture of these creations, for sure.
Yep.
That sums up. Okay, Jason, thank you so much for this interview. I would love to have you back. We could
Sure,
talk
man.
for probably for another couple hours, but we definitely have to kind of like divide this in some smaller components. But I would love to have you back. Thank you so much again for accepting the invitation.
Oh, my
Thank you for
pleasure.
sharing all those insights and all your knowledge. I'm sure people will, well, everyone knows you. You don't need any introduction, just to be honest. But I think that conversation brings a little bit of light from the behind the scene. What do we do? Because a lot of people, they think it's easy. It's just click the button and when we're done. But this is not the whole story, and I think it's important to share that with people so they can have a little bit of better understanding how this whole thing works.
Yeah, well, I hope it falls on the right ears. 'Cause
Yes, hopefully. Yeah, well, you know
people
what?
be like, yeah, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking
Well,
about.
you know what? Yeah, it's whoever wants to learn and listen, they'll get into this, right? Like we cannot force anybody to listen to this, but I really enjoy those interviews because everyone has a different story, everyone has a different perspectives, everyone works differently, and hearing all these creatives, there's interesting pattern which kind of comes where I can see it's kind of similar, um, but I think speaking openly about it, it's extremely important, especially with the times where you're in right now, right? The creativity is going to be, in my opinion, the force for the next few years, and then people who are doing things out of the box, they creative. That's the ones who's going to be successful because there's no other option, I think, at that point.
Well, I'll say one more thing that I think is really inspiring. Whenever I talk about learning about light, uh, I really highly recommend looking into cinematographers
Mm-hmm.
over photographers because if you want to really learn lighting, cinematographers and what gaffers do is really pretty incredible. So look at guys like Roger Deakins or Hoyte van Hoytema or
Mm-hmm.
Greg Frazier and those guys. And anytime they're, listen to their podcasts, listen to this podcast first, of course. But I think that uh, when you really want to learn lighting, those are the guys who kind of understand how things work. And photographers, a lot of times it's about, we'll set up a softbox, we'll put it at 45 degrees or whatever, but we don't really truly understand lighting that much. Like the depth and the storytelling that those guys kind of have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll plug myself real quick if that's okay.
Yes, for sure.
I don't want to forget if you want to see my training and everything. I did a thing with ProEDU about a year ago where we went
Yes.
into all the different kinds of lighting and everything,
Mhm.
and all of that. Everything that I teach is on my website, which is portraitmasterclass.com.
Yes. And you know what?
Um,
I'm going to link everything to
okay.
this podcast. This whole thing is going to go to YouTube, and then I'm going to basically shoot it off also to all those podcast platforms.
Okay.
But we'll talk when we finish. Then we're going to add it all the links, whatever you do. And also I'm going to just share some other stuff, how I
Okay.
can just kind of push this forward. So don't hang up on me. I just want to say thank you. I'm going to end this stream, and then
Okay.
we'll talk for a few more minutes.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.